Hello and welcome to this special edition of Under the Microscope. I'm Michael Young.
And I'm Alexis Rodney. Thanks for joining us. Today, our special guest in studio is former President and now Opposition Leader, Dr. Bharrat Jagdeo. Welcome, sir.
Dr. Jagdeo, thank you very much for accepting our invitation to your and this third interview. It's long overdue, I must say, but today we're going to ask you a series of questions, obviously, that will contribute to the local political discourse and what is taking place in the country since the May 11th election. My first question to you, sir, would have to be with respect to, obviously, what you would have been doing over the last 2 months since the elections. And I also want to know in that same breath, what is your take on elections 2015?
Well, as you correctly pointed out, I haven't spoken much since the last elections, but I've been extremely busy. Before I get into that, I want to bit about my take on what has happened in the recently concluded general elections.
Yes.
We have the official results. We have a new government sworn in. Those are all the reality of Guyanese life. But there are also some troubling questions that still have to be answered about the 2015 general and regional elections. And we are hoping that we will get the answers through the elections petition that we filed, which has outlined the many deficiencies associated with those elections and how we thought that the results do not reflect the will of the people and for what reason. And so as the presentation of our case unfolds, people are going to see the inner workings of various bodies that were set up to safeguard free and a fair process for general elections, how those bodies either conspired to undermine the results or, at worst, were inefficient in the conduct of the elections. Most people know that based on the official results that have been declared, even GCOM results, that we got just over 49% of the votes. And that's what I want to start off with, that even with the official results, we got over 49% of the votes. We are still the single largest political party in this country. The coalition was made up of several parties, 2 in Maine, and they got less than 5,000 votes based on the official results, more than us. And these results were achieved in the most difficult of circumstances. First of all, we had been in office for quite a while.
Yes.
And so we are battling against time. You know, there is a curiosity factor. What if you had a change? And so we are battling the long period against ourselves because we had been in office for a while. Secondly, we are battling a combined opposition. Thirdly, we are battling a significant part of the media that would, over the many years, through a series of a continuous assault on the government and the party, created the impression that we were inefficient or corrupt. And then we ourselves we were battling 3 years when every development plan of the government was stymied because the opposition had control of the parliament. And with all of these things stacked against us, we still got over 49% of the votes. And this is why you asked me what I've been doing in the last 2 months. I've been talking to lots of people, hundreds of them, our supporters who've been traumatized by the result, many who feel aggrieved because they feel that they have been cheated. Many of them are in a state of depression. I've been talking to businessmen who fear for their future because they believe that if they do not align themselves with the current government, that they would be victimized. They're fearful about the slowdown of the economy,
Yes.
and the lack of direction and the incompetence of the current government to focus on issues that matter to the economy and job creation. They're all over the place, created a ton of new ministries, overlapping portfolios, and very inefficient in their pronouncements and their policies. In fact, they have not presented a coherent plan for wealth creation in this country and job creation in the country. I've spoken to workers who are losing their jobs. I've spoken to many people who feel they've been discriminated against because of their race or because of their, like the Afro-Guyanese comrades, because of their political affiliation, many of them. And I've spoken to even people who had supported APNU in the elections, who since the elections are saying, had we known that these guys were like this, we would have never supported them. Who recognize now that this whole change factor might not have been as exciting and would have, as they thought it would be. And a lot of the businessmen come to me and say, we regret this, and ordinary people too. But all of them, I've been doing, I've been saying to the party base that we have to hold together. It will be 5 years of difficult times for the country if the election petition doesn't succeed. We'd have to go back to elections in 5 years. In 3.5 years, we'll be back in campaign mode. And if it does succeed, we'll go to elections earlier. The country will go through a bit of trauma. I believe we'll have greater economic decline, more loss of jobs, etc. And we'll have a government that believes that it can control people's lives, by deciding how they should spend their money. Mm-hmm. They must go home at 2 o'clock. It's good for you to keep your money in your pocket, You'd have much more of that. So I have this based on the conversation for the past two months with people. I have this deep sense that our base is strong and just waiting for a chance to go back to the polls. And that base will have to work to keep it intact. They will try to cause problems with the base. I've spoken to many people in the Amerindian communities who are part of our base too, who are aggrieved because several thousands of them were fired. 2,000 Amerindians were fired. Imagine the Amerindian population is about 70,000 people. And you fire 2,000 of them, and they have 5 members each in their family. You're affecting 10,000 of 70,000. And so many of them are very angry too. And then even in the Afro-Guyanese communities where we have small pockets that part of our base too, they're ready to fight, they continue to fight. So I've been talking to a lot of those people, giving them assurances that the party will weather through this period. They were talking about us disintegrating. We're not going to disintegrate. The next elections, the PPP will be there in a strong, dynamic manner. It will be very, very competitive. And I've been saying to them that 20% of the people who voted APNU will probably have problems with them because they can't go to the next elections claiming that the PPP is corrupt, because they will go with their baggages, and already the baggages have started. Only 2 months, and they have huge baggages. They can't go, they will go to the elections with unfulfilled promises because much of their manifesto, they're reneging on the commitments made there, using spurious reasons. And then people and the economy will decline. And so we have a great chance of winning the elections back again. So I've spent a lot of my time, I haven't been doing a lot of public work, but talking to people, giving them the assurances, and ensuring that their predictions about us will not happen, that we will disintegrate as a movement. We will not disintegrate, we will become stronger. So on the elections themselves, we believe the results were significantly flawed, and we have to take steps to ensure, because even if we go back and we're competitive, but we still have these disadvantages against us, it will be hard to win the next elections. That is particularly GCOM and what GCOM does. So we are going to make changes with our commissioners. We are going to argue for several changes at GCOM. First of all, we believe that Surge Valley does not have what it takes to deliver free and fair elections.
And this is since the last election?
Yes, we believe that he has succumbed to pressure, that he has allowed this institution to act in a partisan manner, and he is in charge. He can't put the blame on the chief elections officer. He's in charge of GCOM, and therefore the party has called for him to resign. But further to that, we need to make sure that the list is cleaned up so that people, the abuse that we had, where when you had sympathetic presiding officers to the opposition, allowing people who should not have voted to vote because they had extra ballots for people who had migrated and were or are dead in the polling stations, that if you have a new clean list, that will minimize that happening because they would not have the ballots in the polling station. Secondly, we need enhanced biometrics, because when some presiding officers said, like we had some cases in Victoria, this is Mr. X, just looking at the photo, and the polling agent from the party sits across the room or is in a hostile area, is afraid to object, they allowed a number of people to vote who should not have voted. But if you have biometrics, enhanced biometrics outside of just a photo ID, it could minimize that happening. We are going to push for electronic voting. Now, you have a system where you can do both. You can vote in the machine, and then it gives you, when you finish voting with the machine with enhanced biometrics, it emits a small paper which shows a ballot, which shows how you voted, which you can then, like some systems have this method, which you can then put in the ballot box. So you have both systems. You can only access the voting through enhanced biometrics, like an iris scan, but you safeguard against presiding officers or anyone else acting capriciously and giving extra ballots out to people. But it's a dual system. It's both electronic and manual. That is paper trail.
Yes.
So we are going to be pushing for that. We have to ensure a fair system of hiring in GCOM, a fair system of hiring people, and that people who are affiliated with political parties do not work in GCOM, who have been openly partisan. There are several other things that we are going to pursue changes at GCOM on these fronts. I've already started using my personal contacts and people who've been talking to us to raise these issues with the international organizations. And the elections themselves, we want investigation. Take, for example, how could and I'm just using two issues because I
Yes.
don't want to go into all the details of the petition. You know, a recount, in our view, is mandatory in the laws. We ask for a recount. Take, for example, Georgetown. If they didn't want to give us the recount anywhere else, because they claim that the recount is at the discretion of the presiding officer. Region 8, we lost the MP by one single vote. A single vote, that was the difference between us and APNU. How could a request for a recount there be unreasonable? Even if you say, don't give the recount anywhere else, because it's at the discretion of the presiding officer, it's not mandatory. How could that ever stand up in a court of law to say that where the People's Progressive Party lost the MP in the Region 8, from Region 8, by a single vote, the difference of a single vote, the request for a recount is not reasonable when you had several spoiled votes, etc. That's one. Two, we had the media in Guyana asking the chairman of the Elections Commission, were there fraudulent statements of poll, fake statements of poll? He said yes. They asked the CEO of GCOM, how many? He said many. Now, if that's the fact, fraudulent statements of poll mean that someone, is it the PPP, is it APNU, is it AFC, are there individuals in there who put in place or submitted to GCOM on election night fraudulent statements of poll? What should have been the response immediately? The calling in of the police, because it is a criminal offense to do this. Until now, Surge Valley nor Lowenfield, neither have asked the police to investigate how those fraudulent statements of poll got into GCOM. So they abdicated their responsibility, and I guess the reason why they never did that, because they were afraid to find out the results of the investigation. Now I'm very worried about the police being asked to do it now.
Why?
Because of so many executive pressure on the police force. Ramjatan has been directing the police on operational matters, on promotions and who should be fired, when that is for a constitutional body, and where the laws say that the ministers can only give general directions of a policy nature. But already we see this evidence of executive lawlessness. But had they called for, had the investigation done, I suspect a lot of people will still would have been found guilty. And now we are not ruling out taking private criminal charges, since this is in vogue now, private criminal charges against some people at GCOM. We're not ruling that out for these issues. So the elections petition will deal with a lot of these matters. I've just given you two examples. Yes. And I have spent, because the past 2 months, coming back to your question, talking to people, explaining to them, assuring them that we are strong, that we will re-emerge, we will win back the elections in the country.
Yes.
Okay, Dr. Jagdeo, you have taken up the post of the opposition leader for the PPPC.
Yes. I'm not opposition leader as yet. That will emerge out of a process in Parliament. So we plan to be in Parliament for the budget debates.
Okay, so why have you decided to return
Yes.
to active politics after
Okay.
you have been exhibiting a continued lack of interest since you demitted office back in 2011?
Well, it is not just a lack of interest. I actually said I will not go back in Parliament
Yes.
or seek any constitutional posts. I actually said that. So a lot of people have been asking me this. And when I said that, I had every intention of retiring totally from politics. Many people thought that I was the figure behind the government in the past 3 years. That is the Ramatara administration. That's far from the truth. I wanted, as I said earlier in 2011, to do other things. So I spent a lot of my time internationally doing quite a bit of pro bono work in the financial field and in the environmental field. And I had started doing some very lucrative assignments, etc., where I'm being paid for. So I thought this is where I probably spend most of the rest of my life internationally in that circuit. Of course, I had an interest here in the political developments because we had an incessant campaign by APNU to basically denigrate or deny the legacy of the PPP, particularly my legacy.
Yes.
It seems as though everything that I wanted to do, they thought was bad. And I'm glad that the Hope Canal that Carl Greenwich said was a white elephant project, I saw him on television just before the 2015 elections in Berbice saying that the people in Berbice, had they not commissioned the Hope Canal in the last rainy season, it would have threatened not only all the rice lands in the Mahaika, Myconia, Bari area, or probably would have been flooded out by now, but Georgetown and the East Coast would have been threatened because of the threat to the Conservancy. I'm glad that they've put it into use, but you do so quietly. I'm not into that now to talk about the legacy, but I had an interest in the PPP staying in office, of course, because it meant a protection of my legacy, of what we've worked hard to do to change the country. So I wasn't, although I was in the international circuit, I still paid attention to what happened here. So at budget time, I will participate with the government, with Ashni Singh and the president, to look at frameworks of the budget and stuff in the past 3-4 years. But I did not engage in active politics here, nor had I any intention. Had we won the elections, I would have probably been back in that circuit. Would have helped because we said that the president had announced this economic
Yes.
commission, and I would have helped part-time on that commission, but I would have spent most of my time and life doing that stuff internationally again, work internationally. The circumstances have changed here. The circumstances have changed. People have asked me, in the last 2 months, under intense pressure to come back here, because they believe that I can defend our legacy strongly. When I saw, had this government started any differently, I probably would have been under less pressure to come back. But they started off by a witch hunt. They started off by firing people because of their ethnicity or their political affiliation. They started off by denigrating everything we did, although they're benefiting from that, saying the economy is bankrupt. Far from the truth. So I know that getting back into active politics, competitive politics at this time, is something that will shut down basically a lot of my international work. And it's going to be tough going. But I think that the party needs me now. That's why they made it clear. They need me now. Our supporters need me. And I'm not going to abandon them now. And so even if it means going back into Parliament as opposition leader, because when you're president, really, you know, Desmond Hoy did it. But I always thought you should not go back as opposition leader. But I'm prepared to go into the trenches again and to engage in battle in the debates to ensure that they do not distort our record. And secondly, we have constituencies to protect. We want them. We're not going to, in Parliament, do what they have done, like try to shut down the country for 3 years by cutting $90 billion from the budget. We're going to push them to do things for people. We want them to pay the public servants what they promise. And we want them to offer the $6,000 bag per paddy that they promised the rice farmers. And we want them to safeguard the sugar industry. They said they're not going to shut it down, the policy statement. And we want them to give help to the miners. We want that to happen. We're going to push for that to happen. And so that is what I'm prepared to go back and engage in the debates. So yes, some people may say, you said you're not going to go, and you've gone back. But the circumstances have changed. I'm not abandoning the party and my people. And when I say people, I don't mean only PPP supporters, the people of this country. I believe I have a contribution to make to see that their standard of living does not deteriorate under this government.
Yes.
Doesn't deteriorate. And so I'm prepared to go back and into the trenches.
Given all you've said, obviously, Dr. Jagdeo, there's lots of expectations of the new government. Lots of things would have been promised. Political arguments aside, since the government has taken office, they have done a few things. What is your rate? How would you rate their performance when we talk about the economic bill of health of the country? Your party has argued that, as you have said before, that you've handed over the economy in a very good state. It was healthy when you handed over the country. The government is saying it is not so. They're saying there are massive problems with the economy. There is a deficit in the budget, not enough funds. There's massive corruption, albeit they have not brought cases forward. How would you rate their performance in office over the last 3 months?
Well, they're so, first of all, I think they've created a lot of new institutions, new ministries. They've grouped portfolios in ministries to follow jobs for individuals rather than ensuring that it is the most efficient way of organizing things. They've created tons of new posts to give jobs to everybody who had a voice against the PPP. And in the process of doing so has generated a lot of confusion and no clarity about portfolio responsibilities. So take, for example, the Ministry of Home Affairs. We knew in the past it was one person. They split the Ministry of Home Affairs now into two. Felix has a part of it. Ramjatan has a part of it. And then they have in the Office of the President an advisor who is also part of the security arrangement, who visits police stations. So now you have three persons with a massive confusion as to portfolio separation, and often operating at cross purposes with each other. So that has been the 2 months legacy in the area of institutional building. They have created tons of new institutions, new jobs at very, very exorbitant salaries, which will come out over time because it's new. They're in the honeymoon period. And one of the reasons I didn't want to say too much too, I wanted to give them a fair chance for the past 2 months or so, because they were in the honeymoon period. Already over 80 days, I think, have passed. what I've seen is making people in consulate very unhappy, very unhappy. So that's the first legacy in 2 months. The second one, and it's the wrong direction, the second one is this indiscriminate mass firing of people based on their politics. It's not good for the country. When you start asking people or firing people or giving them jobs based on their political affiliation, one thing they would say about it, they can't say about the PPP, that when people show up for an interview or showed up for an interview, they're asked who they support, PPP or PNC
But
or anyone else.
they did say that there were lots of cronies within the PPP, political appointees.
Yes,
and
the
Government.
2,000 Amerindians, these had to be a lot of cronies. There had to be a lot of cronies, 2,000 Amerindians, the 40 people that they fired from OLPF, they're all political cronies, you know. They're using this cronyism to undertake a political cleansing
Yes.
of the system. Political and in some cases ethnic cleansing of the system. So that's the second legacy. The third one is to start off on this confusing trip into search for corruption, and maybe I'll speak more extensively about that in a moment. And the fourth area is about the economy, claiming that the economy is bankrupt and therefore they cannot fulfill their electoral promises. And they've been going around to many of the villages saying this to people. So let's take, for example, the economy, whether it is bankrupt or not. Last year, the revenue for Guyana, that is the taxes we collected, the revenue taxes and non-taxes revenue, was $145 billion in 2014. This year, it's projected to be close to $160 billion. Not because of APNU's effort, they've only been there for two months. So they can't say, oh, they did this. Close to $160 billion. That, how can you say a country is bankrupt when every year you're going to be collecting, or you're left with collections in the deposit account, $160 billion of revenue? And that's not for 1 year, that's a recurrent issue. Every year you will have $160 billion of revenue. That's the first thing. Secondly, they started saying that all of these private accounts that we were siphoning off the money, and then they expressed surprise that there's so much money in these so-called private accounts. And they made a big issue at the beginning about private accounts, as though these accounts belong to individuals. These are accounts, private accounts, are accounts held by the ministries in the commercial banks. The commercial banks, they do not belong to private individuals. So take, for example, GGMC would have an account in a bank, say the Marar Bank, and they will pay their revenue into that account.
Yes.
It's considered a private account. It's not in a minister's name or somebody's name. It's the ministry's account or the agency's account. So that they started off by telling people, making big political weather about these private accounts. They found in these accounts maybe $30 billion. The housing account had $8.8 billion. $30 billion there. This money could be transferred to the Treasury to help you fulfill your promises to people. So this is outside of the $145 billion in revenue last year, which will grow to probably 160 or so this year,
yes,
when we'll see at budget time what it will be. And so So you have two sources of financing your promises. Thirdly, we negotiated in loans and grants close to $1 billion US, and that's remaining there for projects. So over the river, we awarded a contract for the paving of the road in Region 3. So you will see the work starting soon, but it is money secured by the PPP. The East Coast Road, to pave it and 4-lane on East Coast, we have secured the money for that too. And that would start. The Sheriff Street widening all the way to the back road, we've secured money for that. That's out to tender. We've secured money for water treatment plants, 250 million from Norway, money from the European Union. When you put all of this together, we're leaving them with close to $1 billion from CDB, IDB, the World Bank, the European Union, from the Norwegian, etc. How could this country be bankrupt? That's about 200 billion Guyana dollars, if it's $1 billion US. Mm-hmm. We left them also with some big projects in the pipeline. Take, for example, the hydropower. Would have seen some 700 million US dollars of private investments in Guyana, the biggest single private investment in the country in our history.
Yes.
We have left with 3 new gold mines coming on stream that one has just started pouring gold that will bring revenue to the state. How come it is bankrupt? If I go, and now the debt servicing, which is the biggest thing that can take up a lot of your revenue, has moved from 94% of revenue when we got into office down to 5% of revenue. So 95% of revenue after you pay the external debt is left available to the government to spend. How could you say that you are inheriting a bankrupt situation? But a lot more of this will come out in Parliament, yes, in the debates. Now, I've heard Jordan today say stuff like the budget will be just as large. I remember the reason as the past budget. I remember the reason they gave for cutting $30 billion a year from the budget, because they cut the budget by $90 billion over the 3 years that they had control in Parliament, is that about $30 billion of that is spent on stealing, on procurement fraud, that we steal $30 billion a year.
Yes.
So if that is true, then the budget should be lower by $30 billion for us to get the same benefit, because they would eliminate the stealing. If Jordan doesn't cut the budget by $30 billion, and what they were saying about the PPP is true, then they are leaving $30 billion there to steal. They have to be man enough now to say, we were lying to people. It wasn't theft. It wasn't so. It was just political rhetoric. If they keep the budget at the same level like it was in the past, either say that or cut it by $30 billion to prove that they're accountable. They said they can't pay the wages, 20% wages to the public servants. But if you hold non-tax revenue constant from 2014, revenue from the Customs and Inland Revenue Department, that's under GRA, will grow by over $8 billion. The employment cost the bill is about $42 billion now. You can finance a 20% increase in wages and salaries from just the growth in revenue from last year to this year. You can finance it. But they were busy, they were saying that the economy is bankrupt, were busy planning a huge salary increase for themselves, and until it was exposed. Now, they even went to the newspapers to justify it. They had some of their friends in a couple of one newspaper in particular, justifying why they needed it. But 100% increase for themselves, moving from $580,000 a month to $1.3 million a month.
They're saying it's not so, sir.
Of course they're saying it's not so now because it's exposed. They back down from it. But in saying it's not so, they're still, I heard Trotman saying, we have a study done because we still need to differentiate. And that is what the reason they were saying. They needed to differentiate ministers from junior ministers, etc. If you want to differentiate, you can leave the junior ministers at 580, give 600,000 to the senior ministers and the vice president, 650,000, not $1.3 million. You can differentiate. And by the way, Ramjatan now is vice president. He's so Minister of Home Affairs and Vice President. But his portfolio is half of what Rohi used to do. So if you pay for work effectively, you should be cutting their salaries. Not paying for designations, but paying really for work done. It is all spurious. And it is the only reason they backed away is because we jumped on it. And they will come back to it. Trust me, they will come back to it at some point in time. People will see that. So we anticipate the capital budget last year was $51 billion. You have 4 months remaining. So the capital budget, if they're accommodating only 4 months, I don't know those projects that had rolled over, how much have been spent already, but they should maximally have $17 billion in the budget, plus what they funded on the rollover projects as the capital budget. Anything above that will be an attempt to inflate the numbers of the budget and fall under the same argument that I made earlier. So we hope that the budget will have a package for the rice industry. We hope that it would provide the 20% increase at a minimum for public servants. We hope that it will put money into the sugar industry because they promised that they will put in. We had a promise to put in $20 billion into sugar, that they will do that. They would give the help to the miners and substantial help to the miners because they contribute a part to the economy. And people like in the forestry sector and all of those, they're bleeding. So we're looking out to see what is coming. Jordan said there will be no tax increase, as though that is a big revelation. Their manifesto didn't promise tax increase. In fact, it promised reduction of taxes, including the value-added tax. They made serious promises. So he's attempting, by coming out early, it's unprecedented that a minister of finance will be talking about his budget before he presents it and telling you what will be in it. Not because of transparency, because he's trying to lower expectations because they know they're going to not fulfill their promises. And what is so appalling to me is that the media, some elements in the media, will never take that up as an issue. The betrayal of the people. Because they're still in love with APNU.
You've heard of government's arguments for the withdrawal of funds from the commercial bank. Do you think that makes economic sense?
Well, the thing is that they argue that we were keeping these resources outside of the Treasury to steal the resources.
Yes.
That we are keeping money in these private accounts, the so-called private accounts, in GGMC, in the Forestry Commission, in the other places, to steal. that we didn't have the statutory authority to do so. We argued we did. Now, if they believe that is the case and that we were keeping the money there to steal, or we didn't have the statutory authority, it meant we were acting illegally. That means they have to transfer the money immediately, or else they have to be man enough again to admit to the population they were lying about the PPP and keeping the money there.
Yeah.
They have to, but they need to transfer it, not in phases as Jordan is saying, but immediately, because it means that it's illegally kept outside, based on their reasoning. If they are man enough to accept that it was not true, that the money was kept there for other reasons, then they would understand the reasoning why some of these things make economic sense. Because interest rate is a price of the supply of funds, basically money. To the extent that government withdraws all of these resources from the private banks, suddenly these institutions will have to start calling in some loans, because what will happen is that those loans will fall below or above the single borrower's limit. So they'd have to call in some loans. If they have less funds, their interest rates will go up. They'd have to push up lending rates because it's scarcer funds. The supply of funds is less. So if interest rates go up, the private sector now that borrows will borrow less to invest in the economy, and already things are at a standstill. Things are at a standstill. So if the cost of money becomes more expensive because interest rates go up, people will invest less. Two, a lot of people who had mortgages, because many of them do not know that there is a fine, maybe in the clauses that they have in their mortgage agreement, that the banks can adjust upwards their mortgage interest. So if the mortgage interest goes up, then it will affect thousands of people who have mortgages, and many of them are poor people too. Now the money could go into the Treasury and help to expand probably government spending a bit more, or to pay back the debts or something like that, some of the debts. But if interest rates go up, the cost of open market operations practiced by the central bank, which is a monetary-ish thing, will go up. And the interest charges will be borne by the Treasury in the long run. It doesn't make sense. It does not make sense. You'll be crowding out private sector investment. In economic theory, most people believe that you should not crowd out private investment, that the government should focus on basically, creating the facilities to enhance economic growth. And let me tell you, I talk to a lot of businessmen. Some of them are laying people off. All the signals that they are getting from this government is anti-private sector. Anti-private sector. They're talking about parallel economy and going after parallel economy. So the first thing that they did is to start checking people's barrels coming into the country. Now a lot of those people, 20% may be people who are cheating the system, but 80% are ordinary people. Their family send them a barrel, etc. That's part of the parallel economy too. So they're going after people's barrel. They're saying they're going to check people's accounts abroad. Now, fine, check Jagdeo's account, check the politician's account. But if you start going after everybody, you create uncertainty about investments. You're shutting down the housing program, basically. So, and what has happened now, if you talk to the real estate people, nobody is selling. They can't sell. There is no demand. Nobody is buying any stuff. Talk to the people who are selling cars and stuff like that. Their stocks are constant. Nobody wants to buy a house now. So why should you buy a house now when in 2 years' time the price may fall 30%? Why should I build now? Because in 2 years' time, the house I build would depreciate in value. So I have to wait. And this will shut down the economy, basically.
But Mr. Jordan, sir, is saying the opposite. His economic argument is that if you remove the money, obviously, from the banking system, it will not hurt the system because the banks will have to go, obviously, to central bank. Those are the commercial banks, and they will withdraw treasury bills, or he's saying they'd have money in stock there that they can withdraw, which is their own money, and they can use that to, if they're lending opportunities, to push the economy and bring it out of the state of pre-recession.
The thing is that if the government increases the spending and the private sector increases its spending too, what happens? What happens? It becomes inflationary. The central bank would have to start issuing more treasury bills to mop up the excess liquidity in the system. So I don't understand what Jordan is saying.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand what he's saying. But let us see, because he is now in charge. So let him deal with the real world of economics, not this cut and paste economics of the IMF. Mm-hmm. Not a cut and paste type of economics.
Okay.
So that is very important, a signal where they're going. Imagine that's happening. The rice industry will now see a shutdown of a market. That market was worth $130 million US. They tried to make propaganda that, the PPP, the rice market would have been shut down in any case next year from Venezuela. But maybe I shouldn't talk about that a little bit later. I can come back to that issue. But I see a picture when most of the sectors are going to go into problems. Gold prices are down, wood prices are down, sugar is problematic, and rice.
Dr. Jagdeo, just quickly, I'm concerned that reports that I would have been seeing in the media with respect to Praderville 2 and your government's investment in Praderville 2 as far as developing the community is concerned, and as well as the purchasing of house lots and how it has handled. The new government says that they have handed the matter over to be investigated properly, and those persons who acquired state assets in terms of land and property illegally will lose them. Praderville 2 is a creature of the Bharrat Jagdeo administration. What would be your response to those reports, especially for the Guyanese?
Exactly, but I want to deal with this whole issue of accountability.
Yes.
And I think they're becoming a bit desperate. They're not focusing on the economy, not focusing on job creation, absolutely no initiative to create wealth. They have a Minister of Finance who contradicts himself all the time, not clear as to where the country is going. They have major problems on the border with markets or energy supply at risk, rice markets at risk, largely because of belligerence. And their whole talk about corruption, because they told the country, we stole $110 billion. You remember the ad that they ran in the newspapers for 6 weeks before the election, $110 billion, not million, $1 billion. So they have to find evidence of this. So what they did, the first thing they did, is to get Gulsaran, who has openly been pro-APNU, and Christopher Ram, who has been pro-APNU, AFC, to start what they call forensic audits. Now, are we opposed to any audit? We in the PPP will support any forensic audit. But for a forensic audit to be fair and to do its work to find corruption, you have to have the skills to do that. And I submit that these two persons, They're political operatives. They do not have the skills to practice forensic audit. In fact, you have to be trained to do that. We're in favor of hiring a reputable international company in a transparent process to do this, to do forensic audits of all of our accounts. We are in favor of that because we don't want people to think that we're afraid of any audit. And that is one of the reasons why we have not moved to the court to stop this audit being done, because we don't want people to think we're opposed to the audit. Although we know, one, that the audit is illegal because our laws do not allow anyone outside the audit office to conduct audits and assign audits to other people. What has happened is that there was no public process. The government has started off with the biggest corruption. This is probably the most massive corrupt act that they have done so far. They have not gone to public tender to secure auditors. They have not done so. This audit will run us probably into $150 million. Imagine if we had handpicked 2 pro-PPP people and give them contract without no public tender, that could be $150 million. We don't know the cost, but given the scope of what they're doing, and they're not only doing it themselves, they're calling other people, other accountants, and giving them work. Only the audit office can do this. This single act is not just a hugely corrupt act, but secondly, for all the NGOs who are here and the international community, they have undermined the Audit Office of Guyana, a constitutional body, which is more important. These people, I believe, have no skill. What to do the forensic audit? What they do every day, they go into a ministry and they get something. Normally you do an audit, you get all your findings, and then what happens is you submit a management letter and the management responds to the findings. Every day they're releasing little bits to the newspapers to make it a political process. But so far they haven't found anything much because it's a far cry to get to $110 billion. So we plan in Parliament to raise some serious questions. First of all, Christopher Ram, Anand Gulsaran, and all of the others who are doing these audits, that they have assigned these audits, will have to go before the Public Accounts Committee that we chair, because they're being paid from public funds. They'll have to point out detailed terms of reference, because I gather they know that is our approach. So they're busy working up terms of reference after the fact. They'll have to show the procurement process through which they were hired, their requisite skills, the terms of reference, and whether we got value for money. And we plan to write the international accounting bodies about this too. But we'll do it through the Parliament. We'll make sure that this is exposed through that mechanism. So Pradoville now, the reason that Pradoville is thrown into this asset recovery, because they don't have much more. They're so far, they're not finding anything. How many times have I not answered questions about Pradoville? It's not like Jagdeo started living there yesterday. I lived there for 4 years. They asked me maybe 20 questions. They asked me how much I paid for the land. I told them this. This has all been in the newspapers several times before. It's not like only after the elections the audit will find Luncheon live there. Now, we all know that Jagdeo and Luncheon and a few others lived in Pradoville too, long before the elections. They know how much I paid because I answered that to the media before for the land. But it is a sign of desperation. So will they now, since they want to look at everything under the PPP, they will have to put the land sold to or given to the Burnham family, Burnham's estate, 5 acres of prime land in the gardens in the city for zero cost, zero, not they didn't pay a cent, whether it was a corrupt act of the PPP. And that needs to go probably too to the asset recovery unit. If you're gonna do that, you want to do this. And I'm now worried about these things because the courts are there for people to protect their rights in this country. So it's a witch hunt. What are they gonna find? That we bought the land and the land price was comparable with what the government was selling to developers. And I explained that many times before. But they want their purpose is to embarrass and to humiliate and to try to make people feel that there is corruption. So my whole court case, I think, personally, I believe that Christopher Ram is getting this contract now because of what he did. He filed that case against me. But having done that, the court case, it's a private charge. And you didn't have, I would put on self-bail. And then prevent it from leaving the country for private charge too. You have people who are in court for theft and all sorts of serious crime, and they'll have an order barring them from leaving the country. All done, in my view, to humiliate our people. But when you're in politics, you have to be strong. And so we will go through this period, but it's a sign of desperation because they can't prove the big $110 billion of corruption that they said we stole. They have to throw in a lot of these things now to prove that point, and it's desperation. They realize now they can't manage the country.
Over the last couple of weeks or so, we've seen a steep hike in crime. What is your party's position on this?
Well, first of all, the Granger administration, because it is stacked with a lot of security-related people, made a case before the elections to the electorate that they will do a better job at reducing crime than the PPP did. They said they had a strategy.
Yes.
To my surprise, after the elections, when the crime rate escalated, and I saw the president convening a meeting to work out a strategy to tackle crime. So I thought they had that because they campaigned on that before the elections. But like everything else, they duped the electorate. So they do not have a strategy. And guess what came out of the strategy? They said, we'll have to get more horses and dogs, etc. That was in the big headline, horses and dogs to fight crime. Now, our approach has been very different.
Different to horses and dogs?
Dogs.
In general?
We recognized that it was a tough issue. We had tough times too, difficult times, and not at all times have we performed well. But we set about to systematically change things in the police force. We needed a new generation. So when I was there, I directed the chief of staff at that time to train 50 young cadet officers from the police who will be trained for a year to go back into the police force as middle-level management. 49 of them were trained because of my direction and sent into the police force to strengthen middle-level management because we recognized that the older leadership was exiting and that whilst you had people who had gone in as constable and worked their way up, that some of them, not all of them, some had advanced themselves, but had limitations with new methods of fighting crime. That is an intelligence-led method of fighting crime. So we then put in place several mechanisms. We created a center for gathering information and analyzing information about crime a crime observatory. We started looking at, we passed a slew of legislation, about 8 pieces of legislation, to strengthen the arsenal available to the police force to get greater prosecution, etc. That's what we need to do. We need to, APNU. I can't speak all about some of the things that are there because I want them to remain confidential to the police force and to the new government, because there are some things I believe that the criminals should not know about the capabilities of the government.
Yes.
But we have strengthened those capabilities, strong capabilities to gather information and to go after people. Those are available. They need to strengthen those capabilities. They need to roll out the intelligence aspect more of the police force, to link that with fighting crime. They need to train the policemen. We will support higher salaries for policemen at any time. The 20% increase, we will support it. We want that to happen. This is the approach, holding people responsible for action. So the entire approach is a wrong one. And then we had the minister saying, and you cannot undermine the police too. I've said earlier about how the minister was giving directions,
yes,
operational directions to the police force. The police force need to know that once they act within certain confines, that the executive will support them fully, not second guess them, not undermine them, etc., that they become the enemy. You need to send that signal clearly to the police force. And when you make arguments, I think it trivializes the whole issue when a minister could say that his response to fighting crime is shutting down, enforcing the law to shut down bars at 2 a.m.
Yes.
in the morning. And that people should keep their money in their pocket. It will be good for them, that it will lower the crime rate, etc. I think it's totally spurious. It's nonsensical. Because there is an assumption that the people, first of all, that the people who are at these bars are committing the crime. They're not. Secondly, if everybody comes out at the same time, you have confusion on the road. They're all leaving at the same time. It's bad for the economy. It's bad for people and their freedoms, etc. Now, I am in favor of addressing any noise nuisance. I will support Ramjatan in this, ensuring that communities are not disturbed. So if you have a bar or a club in a community and disturbing people, shouldn't wait until 2 a.m. to address that. Address it immediately. You know, that they do not disturb communities in built-up areas. But where you have places like clubs in the city and stuff like that, take for example Gravity. Why would you want to shut that down at 2 a.m. in the morning where they do not disturb people in the surrounding neighborhood? There is no noise nuisance. It does not make sense. I am totally opposed to it. I think it should be reversed, that policy, that these clubs, where once they don't affect ordinary people and create a noise nuisance and problems for them, that they should be allowed to function. I'm totally opposed to this.
Sir, now a very touches issue. 2 of your former colleagues and ministers under your government and under the Donald Ramatar administration have been charged formally before the court system. And the new government has said that they will be prosecuting several other former ministers of government who they believe would have had a hand in illegal activity while in public office. Do you believe that the rationale and the explanations given by the government thus far are credible, or do you believe it is a political witch hunt at a different level after former ministers of the Jagdeo and Ramatar governments?
Pure witch hunting. Pure witch hunting. That is why I said before, I explained this issue, because they're getting desperate on delivering things to people. Now they have to fulfill their promises of creating jobs. They have to fulfill their promises of getting the economy going. And all of the things. You saw on page 46 of their manifesto. Somebody needs to read that, how they will finance all their promises. So they need to get those things going. And they have to prove we're corrupt. The purpose of that is to try to destroy us before the next elections. So they will come up with everything under the sun. So Barry Ramsaran, now I'm totally opposed to what he said. I think it is reprehensible. But he was charged for insulting behavior because he said something, not the comments that he made when the young lady moved off, but he said something like, you're a piece of S. Mm-hmm. Now, if you charge people for that around the country, you have to charge like tons of people for this sort of thing. But they needed to make a point.
Or is it different because he's a public official?
Because, no, but the law should be the same for everyone. But in this case, and when a minister says that the DPP, the reason we can't move forward quickly on these charges because the DPP, it's putting pressure on constitutional offices. Because the DPP then feels there's an obligation to act quickly because here the minister is criticizing me. Where are the defenders of constitutional offices now? I see very little of them. So they have already decided who is guilty long before the audit and long before everything. They charged several ministers, although the audits have not been completed. And then when you do an audit and you find that somebody has overpaid, say a contractor, who do you think you will charge? Ashni Singh? Because Ashni Singh doesn't process accounts. It is probably the accountant and the account clerk and somebody else. How do you go after Ashni Singh? But they will, so this is a pure political witch hunt because they're hoping, they're still in campaign mode. They're still in campaign mode. And they're hoping to put enough dirt on the PPP to have people forget that they promise other things. But that time will run out. People will get fed up of that. And they would say, prove it or move on.
Okay, I think Guyanese, the world over, are very much concerned about the issue brewing between Venezuela and Guyana.
Yeah.
The border controversy, of course. Do you think that we are, government rather, mishandling the issue currently?
We have always had very similar and strong support for each other, both parties, on the issue of borders. And so today, sitting here, nothing that I say should be interpreted as us not supporting fully the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the country and giving our full support to the government for that. But in economic diplomacy and in border relations and diplomacy in the modern world too, many countries have border problems, but they also have a great deal of functional cooperation. And they need not allow their pursuit of their rights and their national patrimony. The pursuit of that need not be at the expense of functional cooperation. But you have to have a tone in the diplomacy that lends itself to dialogue. I recall sitting with the president of Suriname, and we together at a press conference said, the dominant issue in our relations should not be the border conflict, and that we are committing to moving beyond that. That will remain. We have our positions, but we will focus on other issues that will bring benefits to our people. And then we talk about bridging the Suriname, the Quarantine River, etc. My concern now about the pursuit of our foreign policy in the new era is the belligerent, pugnacious language used by our chief diplomat. You know, go talk to CARICOM. You're barking up the wrong tree. These people are like a monkey on our back, something like that. That kind of language does not lend itself to dialogue. You do not reject outright offers to talk and to meet. Never. You always have to keep talking and meeting. And Venezuela will always be our neighbor. That's not going to change. That's a fact of life. And we should not put all our faith in a single country that they will defend our interests, because at various points in time, those countries' interests have changed too. We have to put our faith in the pursuit of our wholeness and territorial integrity and our own safety in more collective bodies like, you know, CARICOM and the UN and the other, and the Commonwealth, etc. And so, how do we justify taking days after the issue broke, taking sanctions against a Venezuelan airline because we are claiming they didn't put up a bond of $200,000 US, when you have economic relations with that country in the past 6 years or so that gave you in loans about $750 million. Because we used, that's the Petro-Caribbean arrangement. How do you do that? You have a rice contract worth $130 million a year. If you take action against their airline, you take it away from border matters to economic sanctions now. You throw the first stone of economic sanction. And then you come back, we've all then blamed the PPP too for the rice contract. Because they said, oh, Venezuela is not going to renew the rice contract next year, and they told the PPP government. They told us that almost 5 of the last 6 years. And we called through diplomatic channels at the presidential level, at the ministerial level, and we managed to secure the contracts. We will support the government in maintaining our territorial integrity, but we're not supporting a belligerent, pugnacious, aggressive diplomatic stance. We're not doing that because it will harm our interests. We're not doing that.
Mr. Jagdeo, this is an area, finally, that obviously lots of persons have paid lots of attention to over the last couple of years, the sugar industry. It's virtually on the brink of collapse. While the PPP was in office, there were lots of problems.
Yes.
They still are. I understand there's a commission of inquiry set up to investigate the issues. Recently, Mr. Parvatan is quoted in the media as saying, with specific reference to the Skeldon modernization factory, that the best option is to privatize or sell the factory. There's also lots of discussion about privatizing sugar. In Guyana, the sugar industry, getting it out of government control and probably into the hands of an investor. What is the PPP's position? Because your government has been blamed continuously for the state in which we have found ourselves.
Well, this is not new. I think they're returning to the '92 era. And just last night, I was reading an article about the list of entities to be privatized in 1992, and sugar was there. We've had a gap of 23 years, and they're back to it again. Now, first of all, they claim they didn't know that the industry had financial problems. Yet the chief executive officer had to go to Parliament before the sectoral committee and present the documents, the plan, and the financial state of the industry to point out that we were in a bad shape in the sugar industry. But we were in bad shape in many other industries before that we helped. We helped bauxite. Even now, we're spending $2 billion, more than $2 billion, probably $3 billion a year at the peak level. Maybe it came down because oil prices dropped a bit, to subsidize electricity in Linden and Kwakwani and the other places. We're spending $2-3 billion. But they knew this. They knew that we were trying to get help to the sugar industry before the elections because they tried to block it through GGMC. You recall the whole issue. They blocked it and said, we were trying to get help to the sugar industry because there was no budget. And so we had to use a mechanism through the GGMC to get help to them. It's not that anybody was stealing the money, because it's clear money leaving one entity and going to the other. Then we managed to get some money to the Gaisuku through the privatization of their assets, that is the generation assets at Skeldon. But we didn't privatize it to a person on the street. It was sold to GPL. And GPL would turn around and sell them power, but buy their molasses now. Not the molasses, the bagasse for the cogen. So that we got an injection from GPL into Gaisuku to tide them over until the elections came by, so that whoever took over, well, we were hoping we'd take over, we will then be able to transfer the $20 billion that we said we'll give the industry, because we campaigned on that. We didn't keep it a secret. We put in our manifesto, we are going to give them $20 billion. So all this talk about they discovered that the industry was in a bad shape and, oh, we are trying to transfer money to the industry. Yes, it's true, because we were trying to help them. And we didn't keep it a secret. We said we'll put in $20 billion. They don't want to put in the $20 billion that will take to turn around the industry. So their view is to privatize. But guess what? These guys are specialists. This commission, they've not dealt with sugar, the people there, recently. These people, Clive Thomas has been around ages ago. I don't think he has anything to do with sugar in a practical sense or barbiturate in 25 years. And they already concluded. They made a conclusion. They haven't even given this a chance to work. And if it's so costly to produce sugar at Skeldon, then who in the private sector is going to buy it? With markets collapsing around the world. The biggest problem with sugar was when the European Union cut the price of sugar by 40%, and we lost per annum about $9 billion. That was the biggest problem in the industry. And we couldn't shut down sugar, because sugar generates a lot of jobs for many people, and we're going to fight any attempt to shut down sugar. We're going to fight it tooth and nail, or to privatize it, or to give it to their friends. This must remain in state asset. We're not opposed to this privatizing activities, but not the industry, because if sugar dies tomorrow, the whole economy gets thrown in turmoil. Sugar is a substantial part of the economic base of the country. I think it's probably 15-16% of GDP, and a substantial part of its foreign currency earning. You withdraw that from the economy. Because a private person can't get a market, he shuts down the industry. Then you will see what will happen, not to the sugar workers alone, but to everyone in Ghana. It will affect everyone. So we are We think the government has to put in the money to deal with sugar.
But they believe throwing money again, as Mr. Greenwich had said in Parliament,
It's
down a black hole.
But when they
Nothing will come.
campaigned, they retreated from that position and said they will do all they take to keep sugar alive. They retreated. So now that they're retreating from their campaign promise again, and Nagamutu and Ramjatan, who went around the sugar belt telling people that, that don't worry, sugar will be safe. They're not saying a single word. And the same issue with the rice industry.
Yes.
Because they made a big noise about finding the Petro-Caribbean account empty. And they're saying, oh, this is an evidence of a bankrupt government. It had to be empty. If it wasn't empty, we were not fulfilling our responsibility. We pointed out, as we were saying before the elections, that the Petro-Caribbean is a simple thing. I need just a minute to explain this.
Yes.
Petro-Caribbean. That if oil prices are $15 a barrel and above, then you get to keep 5% of the cost of the oil as a loan to the government of Guyana for a particular period. 2% interest, 2 years grace, 15 years to repay, so maturity of 17 years. If the price goes to $40, the interest rate comes down to 1%, 2 years grace period, repayment 23 years, so the maturity is 25 years. If it goes to, our prices go to $150, the government gets to keep 70% as a loan on the same conditions. So it's on a sliding scale. So all of this money then goes into the central bank in a special account. The government used $141 million of that for GPL, $101 million for GPL, 10 million, I think, $121 million, I think, for GPL or somewhere around there. About 10 million for the housing sector and 16 million for the Hope Canal. But every cent of this was put in the budget, so the opposition saw this. It was only being financed from that account, but it was appropriated by Parliament. The rest of the money, 500 odd million, went to the sugar industry, the rice industry, to buy rice. So we're not keeping the loan. We were just, every time the rice shipment is made, and say if it is made for $100 million, a rice shipment, they cancel $100 million of debt. So imagine they got a price of $800 nearly, about nearly $300 above the world market price. $500 and something million, $570 million. You know what that works out to? That's about $110 billion went into the rice industry through this period, the arrangement. That was why. So as you import more oil, you then get the account replenished, and then it finances more rights proceeds. If the people shut down our access to Petro-Caribbean because of this problem now we have with them, then we can kiss goodbye to any such high price for rice, unless they buy it, Venezuela buys it directly. But they went and told people in Essequibo and everywhere that we had this big account and we could pay up to $6,000 a bag for paddy, and the government is stingy keeping the money. It wasn't true. There are a few things that I've seen that we are opposed to. I saw the Ministry of Finance saying, after them promising to make tertiary education more affordable and accessible, saying that they plan to put the names of students who are outstanding in their payment to the student loan at the airport so they can't travel. We're opposed to that. Opposed to it totally. We're opposed to the removal of the 10,000 grant for transport to the families. I recall how that policy came out. Myself, the President, Ashni Singh, we sat in his office. There was a proposal to reintroduce the large buses. I came from Minister Robeson. And we said, if we do this, one, you will take away a lot of business from the private buses. But secondly, you know, when government assets, you have to hire drivers, you might break down, then people start criticizing you. So how can we help families to offset transportation costs without introducing that? And we said we will start with $10,000 grant per annum in this year. And every year we'll add 10,000 up to a maximum of $50,000 per annum per child, school child. So we will help their families to offset their transportation for the year. And that is the policy. And I hope that this year they will not keep it at 10,000, but they will increase it as our plan was to do. In fact, from what I gather, they want to remove it.
Yes.
So we are opposed to that too.